Hello, and welcome to In Pursuit of Clarity, episode number 39. Well, I'm half returned from my retreat into the woods, and that now I'm at a slightly less rustic location with some weak and sporadic internet. And as expected, I see it's been an eventful 2 months, to the extent that a part of me doesn't want to return at all. But just so you all know, that won't ever happen. As much as I love my complete solitude, truly, at a deeper level, I strongly believe, or rather know, it'd be incredibly selfish of me to simply retreat as the world burns. And it'd also drive me a bit crazy and make me very unhappy, because I feel like I have some role to play and a message to share. A message that, thus far, I've only circled around, hinted at, made gestures toward, set the stage for. Even still, I'm debating how and when to best voice it all. But I feel like the times are so heady at this point that we're all increasingly becoming driven by necessity, and that, one way or another, I'll be giving voice to its more core and foundational elements fairly soon. I've deeply appreciated the past 2 months, the bulk of which was spent in a very remote section of eastern Washington, and had no idea just how happy it'd make me to see that no service indication on my phone. It's one thing to have the discipline to shut out the unhelpful noise for the bulk of the day. It's another to have it completely shut out for you, and to be surrounded by fresh air, fresh water, warm sunlight filtered through beautiful and healthy trees, and all manner of wildlife, untainted by the environment we've managed to so poison, both physically and, in the case of our fellow humanity, psychologically speaking. The several miles of hiking in any direction without seeing a single trace of civilization, the hours of kayaking around placid lakes. It's both calming and deeply energizing and refreshing, and I encourage all listening to never forget that at any moment you can shut all of this out, and you deserve to shut all of this out, at least for brief periods. To repeat that Charles Lindbergh quote I so love, God made life simple. It's man who complicates it. And I'd like to add that God made life simple and beautiful. We've simply stumbled away from that recognition into our own darkness. So, firstly, something of an announcement. I really do hope to do more of these in the near future, and I appreciate the continued patience, especially of my generous patrons who allow me to walk this path in the first place. But I think a change of format might be in order. Please do let me know if you disagree, but I expect it'll be a positive thing. I'm going to make these quite a bit longer. There's a benefit to having them short and to the point, namely a specific point, and staying on that topic, but I think there's a greater benefit to longer offerings. They may be a bit more eclectic and roaming with regard to subject matter discussed, but I'm certain I can fill the time. I have an incredibly large list of topics and root points to discuss, specific ideas and concepts I'd like to flesh out publicly, and there's simply no way to cover them all in video productions. So, to summarize, these casts will be at least 3 or 4 times as long in the future, and probably, hopefully, produced more quickly to boot. And I should mention at the outset, in the near future, I'll not be discussing the specific happenings on the political or cultural scene in too much depth, at least not directly, more so by way of analogies or parables or broader philosophical conceptions, because I'm liable to get myself in trouble otherwise. Watching this all unfold makes me extremely angry, as I'm sure it does so many of you, as this sickly alliance of governments and institutions attempts to tighten this noose and force compliance. I knew things were going to move fast, but as of a few months ago, even I would have thought it a bit overboard to suggest that soon they'd be attempting to mandate the injections of untested and unapproved poison cocktails into the bloodstream of children who have a 99.9% plus survival rate for this mystery disease. This is swiftly entering tree watering territory, if you understand my meaning, and it's best that I leave it there for now. So let's leave the realm of the specific and narrow and pull back. How did things get so muddled, chaotic, convoluted, and exhausting? I think it's helpful to think of things this way, by way of a short story. God, and for the atheists or agnostics out there, you can perhaps substitute nature or the universe here. God provided us a pristine and perfect radiant white canvas. I mentioned the fresh air and water, the warm sunlight, soft breezes through the trees. The natural world itself is truly beautiful, and nature has its own perfect regenerative balance, all centered around the core concept of life, growth, and development. This perfect and pure white canvas, a color from which all others might then be derived, contained the potential for everything. As beings blessed with consciousness, we had the all-important choice and responsibility to bring forth and manifest good things, things in accordance with the best part of our own natures. Initially, it seems we took this responsibility more seriously. Virtually nobody so much as touched the canvas, and those who did tended to be our best and brightest, guided by what was once our innate understanding of beauty and divine law. And though nothing created by our own hand could equal the perfect gleaming white, the colors used tended to take on beautiful shape and form, and were something wholly new and novel and exciting. Insofar as our attempts were to slowly but surely and considerately create only what was best and most beautiful, we seemed to be fulfilling part of our purpose. Yet, as time passed, perhaps as this notion of divine purpose began to recede in our minds through the generations, and a new type of art and new type of artist stepped to the fore, intoxicated with that feeling of power produced by each mark or brushstroke, and even more so by the influence and adulation it produced in his fellow man. Because traditionally it had always been the most honored and capable individuals allowed at the canvas, it became the case that any man to step to the canvas was then subsequently viewed as honored and capable, and a very different sort of man began to emerge, to recognize this and take full advantage. Soon, instead of the fundamental building blocks of primary colors being used to craft and create, those colors which could be directly and clearly derived from the pure white light, all manners of new colors were developed from their free and slapdash mixing and blending, which once again was exciting, interesting, novel, and produced a great deal of interest and intrigue as the evolving picture became ever more complex. But it wasn't just this. Men began to step to the canvas who lacked training and understanding, and some who chose to develop their own standards of the beautiful, standards that deviated from what had been timeless and hardwired conceptions, those innate conceptions and understandings that had produced the most edifying and inspiring works. To those that objected to this, such men would remind those looking on that the man working on the canvas was to be honored and esteemed, and those looking on shouldn't dare be so impertinent as to question his will or decisions. Something had shifted here, though many couldn't put their finger on exactly what or recognize where it might lead. From this point forward, with few notable exceptions, the leading artists taking to the canvas were not only incredibly aggressive in their approach, including freely painting or marking over their predecessors, and using increasingly abstract methods and styles of their own creation, earning them great fanfare and awe among a subset of people, but also began to consider themselves something like gods among men, and never missed an opportunity to exert authority or influence to make this clear. As the canvas slowly grew ever more chaotic, convoluted, and unattractive, the people grew more unhappy, though they couldn't quite pinpoint precisely why. The incremental nature of the changes meant that any degeneration in quality was hardly noticeable. They only knew they felt less content, more exhausted, and less certain and confident about their very natures, their role in the world, and how to set things right again. The increasingly pretentious and dictatorial men at the canvas would answer any complaints by blaming their predecessors, especially those from long ago. Some even began blaming God. After all, they said, it was He who controlled and governed all things. And they often coupled this accusation with the claim that only they knew how to fix things. At this stage, not only was there no pure white canvas left, but even the few remaining traces of primary colors had long since disappeared. And the people couldn't shake the feeling that the all-important resulting picture and backdrop looked dreary, gray, even dark, evil, and oppressive. I'll stop the story there, hoping that the underlying theme makes some sense. We live in an age of bad artists and increasing ugliness, and we live within a system that, unfortunately, is conducive to this, in part because an element of their, quote, artistry was the creation, or at least the hijacking and guided evolution of this very system. It's a utilitarian age, prizing quantity over quality, style over substance, the illusion over the real. And this all combines to empower what I believe might best be classified as two types of mankind. The first are the ravenous and parasitic elements that largely know, to some degree and at some level, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and where they're headed. The second are the bought men, those compromised and co-opted and incentivized individuals who don't bother to think a great deal about the role they play, but know what path to trod to get the most out of life as they see it. One of the goals, for those who haven't recognized the game being played quite yet, is the decimation of Western culture and the wholesale replacement of both the remaining elements of the culture and the people themselves. Those who formerly protested the most aggressively against colonialism and the imposition of a foreign culture on native peoples are now engaging in precisely the same behavior they accused others of. And this time, it's not merely a localized or regional imposition. It's increasingly obvious to anyone paying attention that their goal is to shift the culture of the entire world, albeit with an aggressive focus on Western nations at the outset. These men, the majority of whom descend not from great leaders or courageous heroes or patriarchs or those who founded and built nations, or those salt-of-the-earth types who do the hard and thankless work to keep a nation's machinery running, but rather from bankers, usurers, and monopolistic businessmen, and they seek to reshape the entire playing field in a manner that best suits their interests, and have learned to do so behind a facade of, quote, social justice and the specter and threats of things like climate change, or an international pandemic with a 99% plus survival rate. a pandemic which we'd not have noticed were it not for the daily breathless news reports from their purchased media networks. The late Roger Scruton used the term parasites to his great credit, and beautifully spoke of life as something of a contract between our ancestors, the present, and our descendants. While the "you'll own nothing and be happy" cabal so pushes the concept of living for ourselves and for the moment, he instead pointed to the eternal chain of existence and the idea of living for something higher. He recognized with incredible clarity that when the ruling and governing branch of humanity becomes openly and brazenly parasitic in nature, all begins to collapse. All things become oriented towards mere utility and financial gain. All things become cheaper, uglier, ever more devoid of beauty and spirit and energy and genuine value, as does life itself as a consequence. The parasitic type of human being is that type that scans the horizon to find something of genuine value, to then take possession of it, to milk it dry. Like those men in Hollywood who find those movies that resonate most powerfully with the public and flippantly churn out sequels until the magic is completely gone and the memory forever tarnished. I don't believe it's an exaggeration to state that most of those in this category care nothing about the negative ramifications of their actions. All the world to be reduced to an economic bottom line, including human beings, as individual units, to be studied, quantified, for the purpose of their being more efficiently manipulated. Such men have obtained near total control of the development and evolution of our language, wielding it with incredible efficiency. The term culture, broadly speaking, is now only applicable to non-white or non-Western peoples. Science is now a noun, not a process of free inquiry and honest and transparent methodology, and is weaponized and used as a bludgeon. The most proactive and extreme racial animosity now masquerades as, quote, anti-racism. The artificial tilting of the playing field to harm one group and help another is commonly called, quote, equity or equality. It'd be difficult to fully encapsulate the depth and the extent of dishonesty at play here. And yet, among that subset that still embraces the popular culture they've so studiously cultivated and monopolized, their propaganda finds purchase and yields results. All things that might be influenced or controlled by money are now in lockstep, marching in a relatively singular direction. And this sickly alliance has now kicked things into overdrive on all fronts. Churches are no different. And in fact, an argument could be made that these were the foremost target. The increasing influence of money over recent decades, coupled with threats and pressures on the social and cultural front, has meant that vast swaths of church leadership are virtually indistinguishable from the anti-Christian, atheist social justice warriors. And in fact, a great many church leaders have now been drawn from their ranks. A situation somewhat similar to that of the Jewish Marranos, who feigned religious conversion, publicly, for purely utilitarian reasons, yet in secret changed none of their beliefs. What's so stunning about all of this, something I expect we'll look back on and marvel at someday when all things come to light, is what an incredibly small percentage of the public these current power and influence brokers represent and are drawn from. The goal seems to be to appear as if they represent the majority, the norm, and with the help of technology, they've been incredibly successful at crafting this illusion. But in actuality, this new culture and its adherents still represent a small sliver of the population, especially outside of major cities. Yet, they've hijacked nearly every meaningful institution, nearly every level of power and organ of influence, and have turned these against the last bastion of meaningful resistance, and what seems to be, historically, their most hated foe. All of this, essentially, amounts to a declaration of war. It's a demand, not a suggestion, that you adopt the new culture they seek to impose, or you'll be shut out of the system, at minimum. And again, this is the same crowd that kicked and screamed about colonialism being the greatest of historical evils. Foreign populations moving into territories to forcibly impose their own culture and way of life, oppressing or mistreating those that refuse to fall into line. The level of hypocrisy at play here is difficult to comprehend. Yet the unnatural world they've worked so hard to concoct seems to be falling apart all around them, both domestically and on the international scene. With regard to the Taliban offensive and its remarkable speed and success, this is only a surprise to some in our media and ranks of leadership because of what seems to be their near total historical illiteracy and ignorance. And I'm not simply referring to the fact that the region and its inhabitants are nearly impossible to conquer or control, but that simply throwing money around and purchasing armies and generals, and thus obtaining some artificial semblance of power and control, never works out in the long run. Morale and willpower are the core and foundation of any fighting force. When you have a group of people fighting for their homeland, for their own nation against forces they view as invasive foreigners, against men merely drawing a paycheck, and fighting for causes they could scarcely care less about, the inevitable result should be obvious to any thinking individual. It should also be a signal and a lesson to these globalist vultures attempting to take over our own nation and others through the power of money and bought men. No amount of money in the world can replace that fire and fighting spirit existing in men who deeply love and resonate with who and what they're fighting for. I've actually been back to some degree of civilization for a couple of weeks now. I've just been holding myself back from weighing in on anything, at least in part as an exercise in self-preservation, or at least freedom preservation. I've spent quite a few years attempting to cultivate some psychological balance, allowing me to observe the ridiculous pace of our degeneration and collapse, while keeping my head about me and maintaining some degree of clarity of focus. Lately, I've been pushed to my limits in this regard. The culture and caste of individuals attempting this hostile takeover are as incompetent in their roles as they are corrupt. And I think this is what makes things so trying. One of the tactics I've always used to maintain some balance on these fronts is to seek out any redeeming characteristics I'm able to find in all leading figures across the ideological fence. And even still, I strongly recommend this, as it helps in several ways, big and small. And yet, this is becoming incredibly difficult as of late. When a system becomes this corrupt for this long, merit as a prerequisite for promotion or advancement through the ranks of power and influence disappears completely. And this is coupled with the fact that these criminals don't even bother to stay informed. After all, it's not like they have some fierce pride in their nations or strong love for their constituents or anything remotely resembling these. So I suspect they ask themselves why they should devote any of their free time to anything but enjoying the spoils of their power and positions. To realize we went from a not-so-distant age in which generals and military leaders sought the front lines of major battles, to seeing a military commander practically ensconced in a plastic hamster ball due to his being so terrified of a flu, with again a 99% plus survival rate, and that loathsome little man General Milley actively reading black nationalist literature and unquestioningly taking in all he reads as if it were gospel truth. It really is sick. I've come to believe those truly at the helm don't merely seek to purge decent individuals from the highest ranks of military, finance, media, etc., but that they're genuinely seeking to embarrass and make an absolute mockery of our nations as they burn them to the ground. That's not to say every individual pawn, like Millie, is consciously pursuing this path, but it is to say that cadre of men who always find a way to surround opportunists like Millie know exactly how to effortlessly guide and manipulate such weak men into walking such paths. They know most men seek promotion and their own personal benefit, so they merely need to help set the stage and control the incentivization structure, both carrot and stick. And the majority of those who have wormed their way into positions of power can be then controlled with absolute ease. And this is the unfortunate reality we face. The problem isn't so much individuals at this stage, but rather a system, custom-built to benefit hidden hands. Anyhow, long story short, I know it's becoming increasingly difficult for all good people to keep from, quote, Fed posting, and keep from taking the bait they're so obviously dangling in front of all of us. Which is why I've said before, and will keep saying, individual acts of violence couldn't be more counterproductive, and are exactly what they seek. And in fact, what they've sought so desperately for decades, that they've begun to manufacture them, to produce the desperately needed optics. Recognize this, and find ways to maintain healthy and calm perspective. I'm well aware this is easier said than done, especially for those that have followed the unfolding situation most closely over the past many years, and know virtually all of the infuriating details, and have the fuller context picture. But it's absolutely necessary. We live in a hijacked nation. And, frankly, this doesn't just apply to the United States. Virtually all of us now live in hijacked nations in a very real sense. And I think most of us feel this and know this. Those running the show don't represent the public at large, and for the most part answer to hidden hands, and institutions and cabals that dare not show their faces or state their missions openly. It's absolutely possible to extricate ourselves from this mess, but it requires we all fight the urge to rush forward emotionally, or say or do the things we might like to do at our most angry moments. It may not feel like it, but right this moment, time is on our side. I've mentioned this before, but it's my strong belief that managing public opinion and sentiment is everything to them, and will dictate their level of success or failure. And it's been beautiful to watch so many brave and principled people finally taking stands, speaking up, simply refusing to comply, and engaging in countless other acts of courage, big and small. It's been edifying to watch so many people finally waking to, for example, the FBI's involvement in the January 6th incident, and how things like this are acting as a spur for so many to begin research journeys and dig deeper. And they can't possibly scrub the web fast enough to prevent such research from yielding fruit and creating converts. Converts who seem to be increasingly angry and energetic. Whether it be the mystery virus, the election, various false flags, and dishonestly contrived optics. All of these are acting as similar spurs to wake those who are still able to be reached. It was and is this fence-riding element that thought to themselves they might just be able to bury their heads in the sand as this situation somehow sorted itself out, now recognizing the reality that no, passivity isn't an option anymore, and observing so many of these being energized, or as our bot media would phrase it, radicalized. And while I couldn't be more against individual acts of violence, I'm very much in favor of civil disobedience at this stage, and being courageous enough to speak in all manners of public forums. Truly, now more than ever. It's been great to see intelligent and thoughtful individuals who know how to present and carry themselves and speak in an effective and dignified way, standing and speaking confidently at governmental public forums or school board meetings, or any venue in which the public has a platform to speak freely or ask pointed questions. And increasingly, these are going viral and spreading far and wide. And this type of thing is much more effective than most people might think. The power of our bot press and social media institutions is in their creation of a mass echo chamber, and thereby being able to create an absurd caricature of all who fall outside of these ideological bounds. The relatively unthinking and herd-like mentality of the NPC that becomes so drawn into this echo chamber really does buy into these caricatures, broadly speaking. They really do start to believe that every intelligent or educated person reads Mother Jones or the Huffington Post or the Atlantic, and their opponents live in Alabama trailer parks. Despite the fact that there's still a significant IQ gap between the left and right in favor of the latter, and that this education they so prize would be labeled propagandist indoctrination in any other era or environment, much of which has no fundamental value and is mere social or political theories cleverly dressed up as something else. They're firmly ensconced in something of a cult, and the factual realities really don't matter much anymore. We live in a world of illusions and delusions, where impressions are what matter to most, not truths. So, when they see an obviously confident and self-assured individual speaking eloquently and decimating the house of cards nonsense regarding COVID or critical race theory or anything similar, it really does have an effect, and can cause some to begin to question their programming. And it has such a profound effect because they are so sheltered from this type of thing, and I mean completely sheltered, as news and social media has attained a level of efficiency and subtlety far surpassing the most extreme Soviet or Chinese efforts in the past. Surpassing them precisely due to this subtlety, due to their ability to present an image of free and open social forums where essentially everyone involved just happens to embrace and communicate the same ideas. That's not to say stumbling across such a video might change their opinion in the span of a few minutes. This almost never happens, and major shifts in mindset and perspective tend to be incremental and gradual. But it does combat those precious caricatures and stereotypes they've worked so hard to create. And for those on the fence, it may well be even more effective. More than anything, what is needed at this moment is principled courage. And for every single one of us to remember who we are, take stock in what we believe in and why we believe it at the deepest levels, and set red lines accordingly, and truly dig in and not move an inch with regards to the defense of what we know to be right, accurate, truthful, healthy, coupled with a recognition that the goal of this machine is to, as imperceptibly as possible, shift our norms, often while gaslighting the public by pretending these have always been the norms. Or if they haven't, then they should have been. It really can't be stressed enough that we're currently living in the most profoundly important and historic of times, and this becomes more true with each passing day, practically with each passing hour at this stage. A desperate all-in bid for total power has been kick-started by the hidden hands behind the scenes. The same hidden hands that can freely rotate politicians or celebrities or media figures in and out with absolute efficiency, using them to their fullest potential, and then pushing them aside when they've served their purpose, or become reviled by the public, or mired in scandal. Andrew Cuomo is a good example here. Attacking these individuals is an exercise in futility. It always has been, but now more than ever. which is why attempting to watch figures like Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham, who are essentially the Rachel Maddows of the Republican side of the spectrum, is so exhausting and depressing and ridiculous to anyone paying close attention. Figures like these always point to the tendrils, never the octopus. They reduce everything to the merely political, largely ignoring the broader picture and definitely ignoring the root, while so studiously gesturing towards the branches. There are hundreds of Cuomos, and there always will be. There are millions of individuals who join the ranks of bought men without a second thought. Their interests are financial gain, or career advancement, or the perceived respect of their narrow peer group. And in exchange for gains on these fronts, many would sell their own families down the river if they could do so without being exposed. And this is doubly true for their city or state or nation. So, at this most important moment in history, it's paramount that our time and attention is directed efficiently. The showmen and carnival barkers and grifters on both sides of the fence need to be completely ignored. They serve the purpose of pushing people into a thought framework of unhelpful minutiae, into a partisan political paradigm. This is their role, and it needs to be definitively recognized and fully understood that it won't be one of the two political parties that saves the day. The real battle being waged is a much deeper one. It's cultural, philosophical, and yes, even very much spiritual in nature. And many of those figures and personalities who play the role of your most vocal allies or defenders are, in many cases, very likely doing just that, playing a role and nothing more. Actors and actresses on a stage, all orchestrated by unseen directors, reading scripts written by unseen hands. Despite all of this, I'm not only optimistic, but genuinely and strongly so. My greatest fear in these regards isn't that there won't be enough energy or courage to soon do the things that need to be done. Pulling back, it seems a guarantee that there will be more than enough. My greatest fear is that this energy will be misdirected. In other words, that one of these actors or actresses will succeed, and by creating a narrative or ideological framework that claims to be the solution to what ails us, will ultimately lead people down another dead end, in a succession of endless dead ends, until this energy and willpower is utterly exhausted. I'm confident the best way to avoid this, which I feel the need to repeat at least this once more, is to firstly recognize that virtually nothing is as it appears to be, and that we're surrounded by self-interested role players. And secondly, to make the effort to truly know what you most strongly believe at your deepest and most foundational levels, to set your principles as a human being in stone accordingly, and to not be moved from these, and to be willing to be courageous and pay a price if need be. Someday, when the dust settles, we will all look back to this time period, and will then see, with much more clarity, clear dividing lines between heroes, villains, and the lukewarm, timid, passive, and non-committal. Lastly, and this is crucial, it's obvious this element currently in power will soon do everything they can to shut out the non-compliant, all those that refuse to bend the knee to our new mediocre overlords. Recognize that their power is entirely in our own minds, and exists only to the extent that we believe it to exist. And I can't emphasize how important this point is. They're only able to push as far as their illusion has purchase power in our minds, which means that every major protest in the streets, every time a large crowd simply refuses to comply, every time some principled individual very publicly stands up and says no, they're then forced to scale back or slow their push. Else they risk losing all legitimacy in the minds of the public, even that unthinking subset still under their sway. Having said that, it'd be foolish not to have something of a contingency plan in place. And I'll be creating a video discussing these ideas fairly soon, likely titled A Call for Parallel Institutions, which gives some idea of the subject matter. We need to start taking very seriously the idea of setting up means of freeing ourselves from the clutches of this completely subverted and corrupted machine. It strikes me as a bit ridiculous that we have thousands of farmers, teachers, doctors, truck drivers, pilots, and every other important occupation under the sun, and yet many of us act as if we'll be in hopelessly dire straits without something like a vaccine passport. This is purely an issue of organization and logistics. If some very simple and basic networks and frameworks might be set up allowing us to help and work directly with one another, perhaps even reviving the concept of barter, for example, we'd not have to fear being shut out, not have to fear for the health and safety of ourselves or our families, not be completely at the mercy of a system that so clearly despises us and can simply throw a switch or press a button to prevent us from obtaining necessary products or services, or even moving from point A to point B. I strongly believe parallel institutions will be of extreme importance in the coming years, if present trends continue. And it's a concept we all need to start thinking about and discussing far more proactively. When a parasitic element seeks to position itself between you and I, or between you and any like-minded individual whose skill sets or expertise you might benefit from, the solution is to simply cut out that middleman and reorganize and reformulate structures accordingly. A parasite without a host is, in short order, a dead parasite. This needs to be the goal. No more feasting and feeding off of the productive and creative class as they further tighten the noose of control. So, I hope you can all keep your heads up. Cultivating despondency and hopelessness is one of their only remaining weapons. And it really is not just a paralyzing and unfruitful mindset, but illogical and ridiculous. I sometimes feel as if we're something of a sleeping giant, with limbs tied together with dental floss. We're only bound for as long as the illusion prevails. And everywhere, there are signs of it finally being shrugged off. And that's all for now. I'm happy to be back, and I look forward to these longer casts in the future. Thank you all immensely for the support, the patience and understanding regarding my pace and my solitude, and all of the kind words, and for just being genuinely good people that I often don't feel worthy of. And I mean this. At the outset, it was one of my goals to draw together a certain sort of people, and I feel like the right signal has been broadcast, and the right people are responding, and it's heartening and humbling. Until next time, thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my